this is where the water is emanating from. It's literally, when I got here, it was coming around this drain, the drain flange, the bottom flange, as it were. The flange seems to be tapered, as I like to do them. In fact, I don't even think they tapered the plywood. I think they just cut a hole and kind of set it on there. It almost looks to be a floating drain, and what I mean by that is it doesn't have an anchoring that goes on, except for that left side. Left side looks like it's got a little bite on the plywood, and maybe this back side over here, there's a little bite, but on to the right, there's really nothing going on, and you can see where the homeowner did some caulking and did some epoxy, it looks like, on some areas there, thinking also on the drain itself, you see all of that stuff. So kind of, you know, fishing in the dark, not knowing where the water is, well, it's emanating from this area, but it doesn't mean that it's coming from that area. So when I got here, the water was constantly dripping down right where the drain, literally right where the drain is at, where it meets the flange. There's never a way to really tell because I'm not seeing water staining anywhere around the perimeter of the drain, a little bit off to the right there. But the staining, so literally there could be a knee wall or a curb. The curb could be over here, the knee wall could be over here. The water is dripping onto the floor, and after years and years it gets saturated to the point where it just takes the path of least resistance and it comes through this exit area, as it were, because it can't get through all the plywood and everything, so it finds this area and starts dripping through. So you think you have a shower pan leak, you think you have a drain leak, and neither one of those are the case. But you do have residual issues that have to do with the shower, and thereby making all of this kind of a moot issue. So I am on another shower pan redo. I don't like doing shower pan redos if I don't have to. They're taking up as much time, literally as much time as it would to build a shower. If I had to rebuild a shower, you're looking at about 6 days maybe. 7 days on the top end with all of this stuff going on. I can literally take all this material out and build a whole new shower in about 6 days, 7 days. When I do a shower pan specifically, and all I'm doing is one tile up, 12 inches up all around here, taking out the curb material, pan material, getting it down to the bare wood and starting over again, this is a 5-day job. Sometimes it can bump into 6, but there's a reason for that. Same reason when I build a shower, everything takes time to dry. From the time that I tear everything out to the time I pour my pan, the pan has to dry out at least a couple of days. While that's happening, I'm putting the wallboard, the missing wallboard, back up all around. I'm wrapping the curb, doing everything I can to forward the job, but it's not full days. All of this stuff doesn't take full days. It's a couple hours here, 4 or 5 hours there, and then every process I'm doing takes time to dry. So once everything's wrapped and wallboarded and mudded in, that has to dry. The next day I can come back and I can put some RedGuard on. By the 3rd day, I'm getting into putting RedGuard on top of the pan. That has to dry and cure overnight. Then by the 4th day, I'm putting the tile down on the floor specifically. That has to dry. By the 5th day, I'm grouting this tile and I'm putting the wall tile on, and that sort of has to dry. Sometimes I can expedite the process of the drying on the wall and grout it literally by the 5th day, and sometimes I can't. Sometimes I have to come back the 6th day and finish things out. So that's kind of the process of doing the shower pan. Now the reason I'm here again, as you saw just previously, there's a leak going on downstairs. That leak is very, very difficult to find. There's no easy way you can look at, so let me back up. In fact, literally, let me back out. Knee walls are inherently a problem because they're almost always opposite of the shower head. So the shower is raining down onto the knee wall. It hits on this knee wall with all this force of water constantly, and especially when knee walls aren't sloped like this one isn't properly, the water just gets through the grout line. Then you have this long grout line that goes all the way through because they use 2 bull nose to make up the top of this knee wall, and then you have all these other grout lines. So what I like to see is a contiguous, what I call a contiguous curb top. They call them sill tops, but it's one piece of either marble in some cases and travertine another. and it literally goes all the way the whole distance with a nice profound slope on it. So there's no grout lines whatsoever. I also prefer that on the curb. The curb is also the Achilles heel of a shower. When I take out showers, and inevitably when I take this one out and I locate what the problem is, again, it's a mood issue because by that time everything's taken out and you can't fix it. You can't fix anything that has to do with all your problems with the shower and water are going to happen from this point down. So all of this stuff, and sometimes the knee wall, has to go in order to rectify the problem. There's never going to be a problem all the way up here. Only problem that happens from up here is if you have some areas where there's no caulking, like this area right here, although I don't know that this is a huge issue. It might be the issue, it might be contributing, but we're a little ways up from the shower head. So yes, this potentially is a problem. It would not be such a big problem if they had red guarded behind these walls, but almost certainly they didn't do that. Not a lot of people do when they build showers. So is there some other issues I could look at, you know, as far as where the water is getting into and going down into the ceiling below? Very few. Again, has nothing to do with the pan, and more than likely has nothing to do with the drain. Sometimes that happens. On rare occasions I've gotten into a really bad drain install, but this shower was built 8 years ago, or better, 8-9 years ago, and usually if there is a bad drain install, it rears its ugly head day one. There's other issues going on with, as I said, with the grout coming out and stuff like that, but it's getting into the pan material. You know, there's a shower pan that goes up the wall. It's getting into the pan material, which doesn't degrade. That rubber liner does not degrade. So that's why it's almost always exterior to the pan material. Sometimes they don't wrap the whole curb. Sometimes, a lot of times, they don't waterproof it. So it usually has to do with the curb failing, and the curb will have rotted wood in there, or it has to do with the knee wall, and the knee wall fails and it has rotted wood. So literally these 2x4s that are in here are just rotted out to the point of, you know, like total destruction. Even though all this stuff has not failed yet and caved in or anything, the knee wall is just up there by virtue of the tile alone. I've seen that over and over again. So this is usually a failure, this is usually a failure, and then a bench is always a failure too. If they had one, that becomes an issue. Sometimes it's a combination of the knee wall and the curb, and sometimes it's a combination of the knee wall, the curb, and some perforation of the pan material. If they perforated below the shower pan liner itself, or below, sorry, the grade of the tile itself, if they perforated the pan material, those nails or screws over 8-9 years could rot away, rust away, literally cause a hole in your pan material, and then the water that's getting into your pan escapes through those holes, and then it finds its egress down to the drain because it's the lowest point, and there begets your problem that you have down below, water dripping down your drain, and you think it's the drain, and it's not the drain. But all these other issues cause this problem, and therein lies the mystery. And one of the reasons that I tape this stuff is so the mystery for some people is solved. Even though it won't help you in the long run, you still have to go through the process of doing all this over again, which is another reason I don't like doing it over again. There's no real reason. This isn't not original. The house is in upwards of, you know, 17, 18 years old, but yet this was done only 8-9 years ago, and it shouldn't have to be redone 8-9 years later. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can show right now. When I start doing the tear out, all the things that I told you about will come true. There's a very slight possibility based on what I just showed you below with that anchoring not happening with the drain. Very slight possibility they didn't do the drain right. And even if that's the case, I can't retroactively do the drain correctly without taking all this material. So that's why it becomes a mood issue. But what I expect to see is a rotted curb or rotted wood in the curb. I expect to see some rot going on here. I expect to see maybe the pan liner not going up high enough all the way around, and I expect to see maybe some nails or screws that are rusted out below the pan material. Those are the 4 things I expect to see. If it happens to be this, that would be the exception to the rule. It has happened, but it's rare. I have begun the demo process on the shower pan. A couple of things that kind of stand out to me. Not that this matters a whole lot. There's different colors of thin set. This is gray thin set. when I talk about bleeding, when you use the wrong thin set, you have a bleed through. So the thin set and the grout, even though they're different colors, will always take the darkest one. So you should use a light thin set. They have a white thin set that he should have used on here so that this bleeding thing wouldn't happen. You see on the left, it almost kind of is a grayish brownish, whereas on the right it's not. And part of that bleed through wouldn't occur if there wasn't water penetration. But if they didn't seal it and they didn't use, you know, a RedGuard topping on here, which they didn't, then the bleed through is going to happen using the wrong thin set. That's one thing that stands out. The other thing is what I just said, there's no waterproofing. So they buttered this curb. I don't think they intentionally buttered it. They accidentally buttered it because you see the Durarock is right here, and then in order to get the slope, they put enough thin set on here to kind of bump up and make the angle and all that stuff correctly. The problem is that at this point they should have RedGuarded it, or some type of topical membrane should have been added onto it so that you don't have that bleed through and so that you don't have this water penetration, because this is all wet back here. And regardless and despite what backer board they used, this backer board is on its way to being ruined by me right now, but it would have been ruined anyway and beget mold and mildew, which would have crept up through and caused a lot of problems. So because this is so wet and moldy and kind of disgusting through the last 17, 18 years, these are the reasons I do a lot of these videos. In this particular case, I'm just showing the curb. I'll show the rest of it as I tear things out and finally locate what the Achilles heel was with regard to the failure on here. But I think it's kind of prudent to know as a homeowner how things are put together and what steps you can take going forward if you do it yourself or you have somebody else do it, to make sure that these issues don't happen, which is the purpose. So I'm going to finish off taking this curb apart, see what it looks like. This is an interesting development as I take the curb material off. What I'm finding on here is that this guy knew enough to put his backer board on the curb. Literally had cut it off prior to setting. He didn't set his material into the pan, which I see all the time being done. He did it the way I do it. So his backer board, which is sitting probably a good quarter inch. The problem he ran into is that he shoved up a bunch of mortar and everything under here when he did his tile work. And then the grout, of course, but the mortar was not a good thing, because now both the backer board, if I could show you, well, I'm not going to be able to show you with one hand, but both the backer board and the mortar got married to the point where he may as well just set his backer board into the pan material, because now the water has been able to wick up that material he set in there inadvertently or purposely, I don't know, and then it weeped up the backer board. Did it cause a lot of damage? No, I still feel some moisture on my hand. These nails are rusted out. Not completely, but they're rusted out, and I can definitely feel moisture on my finger as I'm going across here. Some of it is on the side, and you can see some of this mold and mildew. But a lot of that is because he never, even though he did this part correct by setting the board above, he never waterproofed. So the fact that he didn't waterproof and put RedGuard both on the floor material and then come up with his backer board the height that he should have, slid his tile up under it, which apparently he did not do. So this is another minor mistake nevertheless, but still a mistake. The outside is dry. There's still that little moisture that I showed you earlier going on here, but 17, 18 years later is negligible at best. So the outside is dry. The backer board that I took off is still dry, and they didn't wrap. I don't know why with this extra material they would just fold it on itself. It would have been a lot easier and make more sense just to wrap it over. It's only 3 inches, and it would have only come to here. And ideally, you want the pan material, the pan liner, to wrap all the way down to the bottom. Then put your backer board over it, butter it with thin set, and then RedGuard it really well. That waterproofs it. What they did here was kind of half-assed. This was not the problem to the leaky shower. I haven't got to that yet. I will soon get to that. but I'm just showing you the process so that you'll know. I literally just got filming the inside of the curb that you just got through seeing, and then I started deciding, well, let me work my way up to the wall, and look what I'm finding. This is very, very unusual. I've never seen this before. The way I build my showers, again, my backer board on my curb rises above probably half an inch or so. Tile slides up under it so that there's no water penetration ever from the pan material to the backer board. And so, yes, I agree with this process. Also, because he did what I normally do, but look at that. I mean, he's got 3 inches between the backer board and the tile, and then he didn't set his tile first. There's no tile up there. There's also no, you can see I'm pushing on the pan liner, there's no blocking. So between the studs, every 16 inches, you're putting, 2x8 blocking, and there's no blocking, which is not a huge deal, but there's a lot of play in there. And this 3 inches is humongous. There's no reason for that. He could have come down, and he didn't even do it right anyway, but he could have come down to about 1 inch, and he would have had a little bit more girth on putting this tile onto this backer board. Obviously, there's no waterproofing, and it didn't look like he troweled his thin set onto the backer board. There was no remnants of that at all. But what he should have done is had his tile go all the way up to the pan liner itself with the blocking in place, grouted that, and then put his backer board down about 1 inch below, so that there's no contact between the backer board and the pan itself, so that water will never be an issue traveling up. I'm seeing some discoloration, so obviously there's water going on here. Look at that. That's just crazy. But I'm able to just hammer. I'm hammering out tile. There's no backer board here. That I've never seen this. Look at the thin set. The thin set was never spread out the entire backer board. It's different. This was not the cause of the leak, but it's definitely something I haven't ran into before on a tear out. There is spot buttering on this tile as I take it off. Spot buttering, you can see the name kind of begets the process. There is a spot of thin set, spot of thin set, spot of thin set, all the way around, and they just slapped the tile up with a glob of thin set. They never troweled out the thin set on their backer board, which I already knew before I even took this out. I kind of had already mentioned that, and then more than likely they never back buttered the tile. Big deal. In the scheme of things, you got a leaky shower that they spot buttered their tile. Yeah, that's not the way to set tile. But did it contribute to the overall issue? No. Would it have been a problem in the future? As much glob as they put on there, more than likely not. But that is definitely, if you want to do your own tiling, don't follow this lead. Not the good way to do it. Anyway, going forward with the process, assuming that you're going to do this for yourself, different saws will get you different depths. You go all the way around the perimeter of your tile. That's why I didn't knock all the rest of this tile out, because you're going to go around the perimeter of your tile and cut out the top portion of this backer board until you get it cut out all the way around. And of course, watch out for your water pipes. Don't cut into that. You'll have a big mess. And then you pull that backer board off, and then you're ready to go forward to put new backer board on and do the process. And so I'm going to get started on this, taking this pan out, figure out what the leak was all about. So the backer board has been taken off of the wall. There is no obvious staining or anything. As I mentioned earlier, when I was downstairs, if there had been anything going on with the shower valve itself or the pipes, there would have been some obvious wood rot going on, or at least dampness or something, and I'm not seeing a thing going on here. So I can eliminate the fixture itself or anything to do with the water supply. Everything's dry as a bone back there. Shower pan is wet. You can tell by the discoloration. You know, there's some water content in there, but it's nothing more than any other shower pan would ever have. It's not literally oozing water through as I get into some of these jobs. This still doesn't resolve the issue downstairs. The water leak downstairs, when I saw it, was so profoundly evident. So all the material has been taken out. The material itself, relatively easy to take out. Oftentimes the wetter it is, the easier it is. In this case, it was relative. I have definitely seen wetter shower pans, the material as it were. This one was relatively wet, but it wasn't saturated to the point 8 years going forward that I would expect it to be, considering some of the things that weren't done on point. You get a sledgehammer, you start busting out the pieces. I didn't show it because it's very labor intensive, but once you start busting lines in certain areas, you get a crowbar up under there and push up the pieces. Usually, sometimes I get it up in like 4 big giant chunks, you know, going crossways, and take out the chunks. In this case, I got a couple of good decent chunks, but it's gone, and I'm not seeing, now that it's gone, I'm not seeing anything in here that is just yelling out to me. There's no nails, there's no screws that are below the pan line, where you can obviously see the pan line. I think the first screw I see right in that corner is 4.5 inches up. So that's definitely not the problem. That's not a screw. So this one is a good 5 inches up. And as I go along here, I'm just not seeing any failure of the pan itself. As I just showed earlier, back behind here is all dry. It's dry on the curb, relatively speaking. Was wet at some point on the outside. The knee wall is in great shape. There's no type of water penetration going into the knee wall, which is usually the case. You know, not even residual to where it happened last month or last week. So it's a bit of a mystery. I haven't got to the point of failure of why this thing failed yet. They used a good sized pan liner, like a 5x5 sheet, which is great, but it still bothers me that such a large sheet they couldn't wrap the curb. And again, that wasn't the failure. As you saw, and as I mentioned at the first part of the video, up underneath, the drain wasn't, it was recessed into the wood, rather recessed on top of the wood, so it wasn't really anchored the way that I would prefer to anchor. There's a little bit of movement going on. The more I push up on it, the more movement I can get. So I'm not happy with that. It's literally anchored by virtue of the P-trap and the pipe that goes into the main drain. It's just anchored by that alone. Yeah, I'm assuming. Once I take this out, I'll be able to tell. They have recessed this first part of the flange, or sorry, second part of the flange. They have recessed, well, first and second, because they're bolted together, much further down than I ever would. They tapered out their wood to the point where, and again, getting to pre-slopes, if the water saturated in here, then it would have a way to kind of channel itself down naturally because of this humongous taper cut that they did. So when I set my drains, they're going to be flush with the floor. I wouldn't have done this. Was this a mistake? Not necessarily, but them not anchoring it kind of bothers me. I still haven't got to the crux of the problem. I still haven't figured out where the leak is at. Everything on here, surface level anyway, looks good. And once I take this locking ring off and the drain barrel, I'll kind of have a better feel for what's going on. I did, however, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, if you pull this pan liner up, there is definite water going on the subfloor here. So wherever this water came from, had to come from this area. This is the Achilles heel of this shower and why it's leaking. Specifically, what they did wrong, I don't know yet, but I'm gonna soon find out. Now that I have the barrel out and I have the top locking flange unscrewed, as I pull this out, you see that they made the circle cut. Well, two things. They made a circle cut, which I don't personally like doing. Most guys that do a circle cut literally do it up to the edge of here and give themselves a 1/4 of an inch just by virtue of the cut of room between it gets to that bolt hole, or before it gets to that outside part of the bottom flange. I know I don't explain things very well. And so the reason I don't do the circle cut, again, he did it far enough in that there's some flap going into the drain. So there's still positive water flow going into the drain from the weep holes and the troughs that exist. So I do the X cut so that my flaps go positively into the drain, and it's much more difficult for water to ever come up and then over again. Second thing is that when I pull this up, there's no caulking, and so as I take this out, you'll see there's a ridge on this bottom flange, and that ridge on the outside edge should have had some caulking on there, so that when the pan liner goes down there, they get stuck together, and there's no way water could get up under and then over to your subfloor. It's not going to work. Again, going this far into it, I'm still not seeing the problem, but as you just saw, there is water leakage onto the subfloor up above, and so it's definitely happening from somewhere. So I'm going to take out this pan liner, and normally I don't start ripping things out until I know that that this isn't the issue, and I already know that, so I don't have a problem with taking things out. I don't want to cause damage and then blame it on my tear out and say, well, here's a problem, but then I'm the one that caused it. So that you don't know what's going on. And a lot of the reason that I do these videos on these tear outs is so that you're aware of some of the issues that I see when I do the tear outs, and so that you could then proactively not make the same mistakes that the other people did. So now we're loose from the back and pulling out the pan liner. It is saturated with water. Why? The only rationale that I could see, is that there was a drain clog, and that the drain clogged so much that it was able to, again, this ridge right here is what I was getting at, you know, putting some caulking up there and kind of making the pan liner stick to your drain flange if there was a backup of your drain, would negate water from ever getting there and causing this wood wetness that you're seeing going on. Is very saturated. So much so that I can't even put a new pan liner down right now. This has to dry out. This is 3/4 inch ply. This isn't even OSB, which I can't stand the stuff anyway. So this is a very sturdy, durable subfloor. Thankfully, because if it was OSB, all this stuff would have to be cut out. It would have expanded out twice the size, twice the thickness. The only fatal mistake that I see that they made, and I don't understand how this would have caused a leak, was that they cut out the subfloor way below where they needed to. Way below. This flange should have been sitting on top of this board. So it remains a mystery. Is there a pinhole leak somewhere in the pipe? You know, like I'm looking, thinking maybe that could be the problem, you know, minusing everything else. I don't know. Which is a real oddity, because normally I'm able to ascertain where things failed at, and in this case I'm just not seeing it. If water was leaking down below, which it was, and it had to do with the drain, then it wouldn't have affected this wood. It had to do with the top area that I just took out, and I'm just not seeing, especially since it's central to the drain. It's spread its way out to the left and right a little bit, but no doubt it emanated from here. And I'm a little disappointed in myself that I can't come to a definite conclusion. I'll have to give this some thought. And if I don't figure it out, maybe you can, if you're learning enough in this as I am, put your best guess down in the comment section. After having taken out the P-trap configuration, there is no backup. Yeah, it's dirty, yeah, it's nasty and all that stuff, and hair and residual garbage down there. But there's no calcium buildup. Typically what I'll see is the guy who had poured the pan before will throw excess mortar and or thin set and or grout into the drain and cause major problems, you know, to where it's like a clogged artery. You barely have water going through. That was not the case here. This was down below, and the homeowner had over the last couple of years done everything in his power using epoxy on here and using caulking and using every conceivable means of chasing down what he thought was the leak. Obviously, where this connector is, thought the leak was there, then he went up to here, then he went over to here. And the reason he went to here is because you see this crack. So this is what I didn't know going into it, although it wouldn't matter. You can't replace this bottom flange from the bottom. All of this stuff would have had to happen regardless. If we knew definitively that this was the cause of the problem, everything still has to come out. You can't put one of these drain flanges in after the fact. So didn't waste any time necessarily, but it is frustrating for me to wrap my head around the fact that this bottom flange was cracked, and it wasn't something that I did. Obviously there's epoxy and glue up under there, and the crack transfers into the drain slightly, but ever so slightly and ever so thin. In fact, the pan liner wrapped over that crack, and so the only way that water could have gotten through would be the backup of the drain coming up under the pan liner that went over there, and understand it was pushed down by virtue of the top locking ring. So it would have to go up under the pan liner and past this bolt hole area and then into the larger area of this crack. So was that the issue? Well, I'm going to say a couple of things. I'm not, because I've checked everything else, right? I've looked at everything. Literally, I ran the shower to see if there was anything going on with the valve or any of that stuff, and I'm not seeing a thing. So now, even though I have never seen this issue before, I've never even seen a cracked drain before, now I'm pretty well convinced that this is an issue for a couple of reasons. Not only because the crack exists, but also because, as I said earlier, this drain, the whole configuration was never anchored properly. There was no screws for this particular drain to anchor it down. It was almost like it was a floating drain in some ways, and because of that, as you're walking around in the shower, is it possible that some of the weight of the mortar and the person in the shower and all that stuff could be pushing this ever so slightly, and if water was creeping its way up inside through there, that water could penetrate through that crack and then exit out and get onto the floor, which is why we have a wet floor. Yes, this is an anomaly that I probably will never, ever see again. And this is a reason why I get called about a shower pan leak, and I know it's not the pan, although that does happen on rare occasions. It's usually something residual to the pan material itself, or the way it was put in, or. So there's never a way to tell until you've done a dissection of the whole thing the way I have on this video, and shown these anomalies that do happen. So how would I know that? How would he know that? How would a plumber, how would anybody know that to be the problem until you take everything out? And another reason I post the videos, so that you'll know that yes, some of these things you're gonna find out as you're doing the build, or some of these things, if you're gonna build it yourself, that you make sure you don't do, but who would have thunk? I wouldn't have.